hand things over to Sarah, and she'll introduce our panelists for the day. As 2020 would have it, one of our panelists is not going to make it because of some of the California wildfires, but it wouldn't be 2020 if we didn't have a few glitches along the way. So, Sarah, I'm going to hand it over to you and let our panelists go live.
All right. And it looks like we've got Heather and Diego here with us, and I'd love for them to be able to say a little bit about who they are and where they are in the world today. Heather, should we start with you?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I actually am in Richmond, Texas, which is outside of Houston. And I'm joining from ExxonMobil. I started there about 8 months ago. And before that, I worked at a variety of companies, either as a supplier or on the company side with a variety of industries. My first foray into oil and gas, and it's been trial by fire. So I hope to share some of what I've learned in doing some of do-it-yourself research at ExxonMobil.
Where were you right before Exxon?
I actually worked for myself for about 2 years, so I'm really good at do-it-yourself.
Yep.
ExxonMobil, who's not used to do-it-yourself research, and before that, I worked for Texas Instruments, and then I did some consulting at Research International and Capital One. So I've been around.
That's good. That's good. Looks like we're getting a lot of shout outs from the Texas crowd. So yay, and Argentina too. Diego, would you like to go next?
Yeah. So I'm Diego Han. I work at Procter & Gamble right now. I've been there a little over 2 years. So I'm in Mason, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati. And I came from my MBA at Wisconsin. So go Badgers if anybody's out there.
Woo-hoo. I'm a Badger.
Oh, there we go.
I'm from Wisconsin. So it just my background is that I've spent my career mostly on the client side at Clorox initially and seventh generation and Keurig, with a more recent adventures in brand consultancy and independent freelance work, and now AYTM. So what I wanted to start out with was getting a sense of what Agile means to you, and if it was something you were looking for specifically, or if it was something that you stumbled upon in some way in your journey. Diego, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I can start. On the what does Agile mean to you? So I know it's a big buzzword nowadays. Yeah, so for me, I'd say it just means being able to adapt quickly. So being agile in our research is just the ability to constantly adapt to your consumers' wants and needs. So it obviously depends on your objective, right? But in innovation, and I was in innovation the past 2 years at P&G, I found it's often better to just conduct many different iterative tests, bring the consumer along at every touch point, and it allows you to adapt with them versus kind of putting all your eggs in one or two giant studies or baskets. So yeah, I'd say being agile is more than just speed. It's about being effective. And I kind of fell into it because as a new hire a couple of years ago, my first day, we had a bunch of suppliers show up and they were just introducing themselves. So I almost didn't get, I'd say not stuck, but I almost didn't get thrown into the regular mindset of how we do things, and kind of just started seeing all these different options and opportunities, and just started meeting with a bunch of different DIY suppliers and just figuring out how to do things myself. And I think I just kind of fell into it and started loving doing it.
Yeah, that's a great take on it. Heather, what about you?
I agree with quite a lot of that. It's trying to be adaptive and adapting research instead of having studies that take 9 to 10 months to finish, being able to learn as you go, and working at Texas Instruments and now at ExxonMobil with a lot of engineers that are into design thinking and creating an iterative process, and a lot of them are asking for more agile research and being more in touch with their consumers. And I think also that I would add to that is allowing others to learn quickly. So research is something that not everyone knows how to do. And I think some of these do-it-yourself tools allow other people who don't typically do research to learn how to do research and to do it quickly.
Yeah.
That's one thing that we've learned.
thinking about the interaction between design thinking, where it really is about getting those little boosts of feedback right where you need them, really makes sense. I think that was always one of the struggles with the older formats that took longer and cost more because you had to kind of choose which battle you were going to pick. And now there are increasingly ways that you can get those boosts of consumer knowledge right where you want them to be, which is amazing when you're trying to iterate towards continued greatness. Was there for either one of you a catalyst or a starting point or something that kind of pushed you towards Agile? Diego, you kind of mentioned getting thrown in a little bit. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I don't know if there was a specific catalyst, but I would say that we're always, at least on the P&G side, trying to learn, and we're always meeting with different suppliers and trying to just learn different ways of doing things. So again, I think just my ignorance of coming in, not really knowing the traditional way of doing things kind of played to my benefit, because then I could just explore everything and then decide what worked best for me. So I'd say my catalyst was being a new hire more than anything.
Mm-hmm. And Heather, what about you? What was your situation like when you came to Exxon?
Well, it was really great. And then the price of oil dropped at an extreme rate. And then people stopped driving, which means not as much fuel is being consumed. But we still needed to do research, especially with what is happening in the world. And we're a global company, and we have to do global research. I don't just focus on one market. We had to have an agile approach that would allow us to do research in about 20 markets at the same time. And that was kind of what I think our research budget got cut dramatically, but we still needed to do research. In fact, I'd say more than ever, we needed to research our consumers and our customers. Mm-hmm. And quickly got all of us involved in doing, we couldn't work with a lot of our vendors anymore, just not having the budget. So a lot of our people became researchers overnight, and teaching them how to be researchers was also part of our agile approach in our process, which was a lot of fun, I have to say.
Yeah, tell more about that process, because I think a lot of people right now are going through a bit of a pinch point as they navigate, changes due to the pandemic, just an evolving new normal or next normal. How did DIY potentially enable you in that coping or that quick adjusting that needed to happen?
I think for us, it actually had an unintended benefit. Because most people that I worked with had never done research before. A lot of them are engineers. And so trying to teach them how to moderate sessions online with consumers, having them learn how to write a survey, having them really focus on what we're trying to learn. Instead of just going out and researching everything, it was really focusing on what we needed to learn, because we had limited real estate in our surveys, and then really teaching them that discipline, and then actually having them write the insights. And what we found is what would normally take us 6 to 8 months to implement was taking about a month to 6 weeks to go from the survey development all the way to implementing the result, which is some of the things we're doing now at some of our sites around the world. We actually implemented that in about 6 to 8 weeks instead of 6 to 8 months.
That's a massive time shift. What about on your end, Diego? Have there been ways that being sort of a agile or more do-it-yourself organization helped you at your role in P&G navigate the changes that are happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we really were able to move forward without missing a beat. I think we adopted that kind of agile mindset, not just DIY, but kind of doing our own research on our own as well. So, I mean, most of our tests are already iterative tests that we do virtually, both quantitative and qualitatively. So it's been business as usual as much as you can, except for we're sitting at home now with a t-shirt, obviously. And obviously we're aware of the impacts that both socially and economically that the pandemic can have both on our coworkers and our consumers. So we've tried to adjust accordingly. But I think our mindset that we've had the past 2 years has really just set us up for success. And we haven't really had to rely too much on others or really adjust things too dramatically, because we already kind of at the forefront of doing everything Agile and DIY.
So you had kind of gone through a lot of the, you were well on your way in DIY. Heather, were there specific challenges or hurdles that you had to overcome to kind of get your organization ready? I mean, you mentioned sort of training everyone to kind of be able to do it themselves. Do you want to say a little bit more about what that was like? Because I think a lot of people are in the spot where if you really have to do it yourself, there's a few skills that you have to remember or learn.
I think the most important thing that we tried to reassure people is that there was no failure. We were learning as we were going, and to reassure them that even if it didn't go well, it was still learning, and so it was still a good thing. And I know as we trained people, so we had people in Europe and Asia and the US, and so we were training across multiple time zones, and launching surveys and launching some of our diaries at 2 o'clock in the morning my time. And I think more than anything was coordinating all the different time zones. But what really was like giving them the confidence. I didn't realize how afraid people are of research until you teach them how to do it. And I know one person, he said, "What if I asked the question wrong?" when he was moderating some online sessions. And they said, there is no wrong way to answer or ask a question. But they were really, really nervous about it, and giving them that confidence that it's okay, that we're not going to fail, we're all going to learn. And now they have this closer connection to the consumers. And so every time they're doing things now, they're saying, is this what the consumer would want? Am I doing the right thing for them versus are we doing what we should be doing as a company? So it brought about a lot of change in the organization, a lot more confidence with research and tools and writing surveys.
Yeah. One of the things I love that I think is a really helpful frame that I've seen people use is the idea of thinking of it always as a conversation, even if it's a quantitative conversation, really just trying to think like if I were having a chat with this person, like how would I want it to flow? And, on the quantitative side, then trying to really think about how you can most clearly articulate the concept or the idea so that everyone's answering the question in the way that you expect them to. One of the questions we had come in on the chat is sort of in that same vein and thinking about Agile and how different teams or companies like sort of think about it internally. And maybe Agile isn't exactly the word you use internally, but how do you think you describe within your company these kind of methodologies or techniques, and what kind of processes do you include in that, generally speaking?
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think so. When I don't know that we ever use the term agile. It's more of a call like conversations, like you're saying. It's
oh, that's nice.
And it's almost like if you were in a room with a person and you wanted to get them talking about some of their life, you wouldn't ask them, "Tell me what you want me to create." You would ask them about themselves, who they are, what are they looking for in life, and so we were teaching people how to have those conversations with consumers, like you were saying, but then learning from them and then adapting our style as we were learning from them. So what we started out with was people trying to do like a questionnaire and ask them question, and teaching them those are just guides and some ideas of what you would ask a person, but create more of a conversation with them to learn about who they are as people. And from that, you can get those unmet needs that they have to provide solutions for them. And I think it was back to what Diego was saying. It's being agile enough to change as you're going along and learning and adapting your style and adapt. So I think it's almost like letting go of your agenda and what you want to learn and really having the consumer tell you what they are thinking. And that's where I think it's like an agile thought process, maybe more than anything, is just getting rid of your agenda as a researcher or as a company and adapting your style to what the consumer wants.
I think that's so fascinating, and really it puts the research process, I think, in a much more compelling light, in the sense that it's also like thinking about the work we do quantitatively as listening, and really sort of being attuned to what people want and need from the products or services where we're trying to connect them with. One of the questions that came up in the chat has been whether you think there's big differences in doing that in a B2B way or it versus the direct-to-consumer way that we're most often doing it. And you may or may not have experience in that realm, but I wondered if either of you wanted to comment on that. Because I think the overarching idea of thinking about creating those conversations in a way that you can get the responses and listen where you need to have that consumer listening is definitely the same. Sometimes finding those people to have the conversations with is the challenge. But I don't know if either of you have had experiences with that aspect of thinking about a more B2B versus B2C context.
Yeah, I mean, I would mirror exactly what you said. I don't think it's much different. I think they're still a consumer, whether it depends on what your objective or key question is for them, but they are still a consumer for you. And like you said, it's going to probably be harder to find that consumer if you're looking for a specific business or a specific person at a business, but it's the same, right? You're still trying to learn from them and you're trying to have them lead conversations for you. And I like the way that you put it. It's a conversation, right? And whether it's qual or quant, you're still trying to have them lead you towards a direction versus obviously us asking leading questions to them. So I think it's the same. It's just obviously you're going to have to adapt it a little bit based on trying to find them.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the point where it's not internally, I don't know that we spend a lot of time sitting around thinking about how can we be more agile. Although in some cultures, I think there is that engineering, you're on sprints or you're trying to move quickly or leverage a more design thinking. And Agile definitely fits really nicely, I think, with that approach. But to me, I think I would define Agile as that ability to get the bits of consumer listening or the broader consumer input into that process where you need it at every key point. I wonder, one of the questions that we had come up is, are there things that you think don't fit well with Agile or that are maybe more challenging to do in that way? And I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts about sort of what can easily be Agile versus what has a harder time being Agile. Yeah,
I would say that, I mean, again, I'm going to say this all the time. It's like the cop-out question, but it depends on your objective and key questions, right? But I think being Agile or doing DIY approaches or whatever you want to define it, like it's super important, but oftentimes you might need to take that step back and really get grounded in your consumer in a different way. So sometimes I'll bring in and kind of take a step back and we'll bring in experts who provide kind of unique, fresh perspectives. They might help us run a larger study or use future-proof innovation, again, to use another buzzword. Like they're just going to help you a lot with kind of taking a step back and seeing the big picture. Whereas Agile, I'd say, or DIY approaches, we use more for kind of quick iterative, like you said, like constant consumer connect. So in the past, we might say, hey, let's develop this huge project or proposition, and we'd have one or two big studies to confirm our project. But now we're kind of talking to consumers at every touch point. Like, what is the name? What is the claim? Where would they want it? Like, we're doing every little touch point to try to bring the consumer along the journey, like you said. So again, I think it's beneficial to still take a step back in some points, but it's more going to be in combination with a more agile approach versus just saying one or the other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because it is, I think, sometimes that mix of, trying to, maybe in the past you just did fewer, bigger, but suddenly you're empowered to just really get the bits you need right when you need them. Heather, I don't know if you had any thoughts or builds on that.
I think the only time where we have, and not just with ExxonMobil, with other companies where we've struggled with that, is when you're trying to do large scale changes to like brand positioning or segmentation or some of the bigger, broader global changes that are not implemented kind of locally, but are across a whole brand or a whole proposition or some big changes. I think, although I like adding some type of Agile to that, because I think if you say it's going to take us 18 months to do a brand positioning and repositioning, people are going to say, well, then we're just not going to do it. But if you can say along the way, we will have check-ins where we will help you with your guidance, because when you're trying to develop marketing plans and advertising plans, and if you say, I have to wait for 18 months to do anything, they're just not going to want to do it. So trying to take a broad long-term view and then break it into little parts so that it's more digestible. I think that's the only part where we've struggled with some of the Agile approaches, when you're doing big, broad projects that can take a long time to go from, starting it to actually seeing it come through 3 years later in market, and just breaking that into pieces makes it a little bit more agile.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think sometimes some of those bigger studies, when they come back, part of the real challenge was getting people to sort of be able to take it all in all at once. It's kind of like, you've been starving for a while, and all of a sudden you've got the all you can eat, but it's a little, more than you can handle probably. One of the things that I'm curious about is how you think about you're deploying your team, or if you've done anything or it's evolved that your team is structured potentially different than it might have been before you began embracing Agile or do-it-yourself methodologies. I know some organizations have a tendency to push programming down on some junior person. Some organizations are kind of like, hey, we're all going to be in this conversation, and you're all going to carry some part of your weight. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts about how to best think about that if someone was getting started, or any advice you'd give to someone who is maybe at the early stages on the path.
I think just the situation we were in, because it was kind of a free-for-all, because we didn't have the luxury of organizing. It was all hands on deck. And as long as you were in part of the marketing organization anywhere in the world, or our CX group, our UX team, we trained 25 moderators in Europe alone. From our marketing CX group, we had a lot of our data group involved. And I think for us, it was just, everyone wanted to learn. So I think it's how you position it. Like, what are they going to get from it?
Marketing the marketers.
Yeah, marketing the marketers. And it was like how we positioned it. It was like, we're all going to learn something new. You'll have a better connection to consumers. It's something great that you can put on your performance evaluation, that you learned something new this year. So we just took away all of their reasons to not believe. And part of it was, I don't know. It was like trying to influence them and how exciting and fun it could be. And I think everyone always wants to be a researcher. I hear people say how much they love research and they love all of it, but then the idea of actually doing research was a little intimidating. So I think what this allowed us to do was make it less intimidating, because they could go and try the tool by themselves. And we gave them trial, little fake surveys, and they could go off and try this to work with the surveys themselves. And now I think it's been very beneficial to them. They have a much more, for me, there's a lot more respect for research now within the organization, because they realize it's really difficult to do, and not just program a survey, but to actually think about and focus on what you want to learn, and how those 20 questions you write have a purpose and a meaning, and you don't just write questions just to write them. So I think it's just, you have to get started and convince the organization that there's a greater good for it, and that they will benefit from it also.
Oh, that's good. One of the questions that's come in on chat that I think is a good one from Christopher Boone, thank you, is thinking about that difference between when you're sort of upstream and thinking about where you need to innovate and customer needs and how you sort of bring a product to life potentially, and then more of the downstream marketing activations and the in-market side of things. Do you have thoughts about how you've used Agile techniques in both spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and I don't know if this is going to answer your question at all, but I would say that I focus more with both sides on like what is their end objective or what is their end question, and less on like the methodologies and less on like here's how I'm going to get there. Because if I focus on, if somebody tells me I want to learn this, like, and I'll make sure I know what they want to learn. Like I'll create a comprehensive learning plan and run it through them and make sure, hey, is this everything you want to learn, and take it through higher ups or people below me. It doesn't really matter. Just I want to make sure we capture all the learnings, and then I'll deal with whatever methodology or whatever I see fit. Because if we start getting super granular into like how we test it, I think people just go back and forth and then just throw their opinions without even knowing anything, right? So it's best to just say, hey, tell me what you want. I'll go figure this out. I'll go solve this for you, and then give you the results. And then when they start seeing these results come 6 weeks faster, like Heather said, than they thought originally, they're gonna be like, whoa. And it's like a huge benefit for both yourself and for them to just, hey, let's just focus on these questions no matter what, and I'll go answer these for you, and I'll determine which way is best to answer those.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, my gateway experience into Agile was ad testing, because it was such a challenging timeline situation, because, everyone's always compressed, and it's always like, who's going to give to make the timeline stretch to get the real work done, and you have to pick, like, am I going to choose to test rough ideas and, get the bad ones out early and often, or am I going to wait and just like use judgment and test the final? And really in that advertising testing context, it was so obvious to the organization, just like you said, Diego, that they were like, why would we ever do it any other way? And to be fair, it was honestly one of those experiences that made me also reflect on what my real job was. I loved what you said about just tell me what it is you wish you knew. Because I think sometimes in that old world order, there's a little bit of my job is to reinvent the questionnaire wheel every time. And really, like, the best thing you could do in some cases is be quite consistent, from, apples to apples comparisons of, especially in market executions, have that. Heather, I wasn't sure if you wanted to come in on any of that.
No, I think that's the only thing is upstream and downstream means a little bit different in oil and gas industries. My brain was thinking upstream and downstream, but I think I agree with Diego exactly. It's what are you trying to learn versus how are you trying to learn it.
And maybe fuzzy front end versus sort of the tangible go to market side, or whatever that distinction is. Okay, a last question that came in because we're getting close on time. Diego, this was the shot more towards your direction. Do you feel like there's still a space for traditional research experience, or how would you think about that classical skill set in a world that's increasingly trying to move faster?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the fast approaches are grounded in that traditional thinking anyway, right? Like, we're just trying to adapt it to fit our needs, whether it's our timing restrictions or requirements, or whether it's just like we need to move fast and answer multiple questions. But at P&G, I'd say we're trying to move more towards these DIY Agile. But like I mentioned before, like, there's always a space for traditional research. And I mentioned it, like, whether it's grounding yourself in the consumer and doing a more holistic approach, or like Heather mentioned, like segmentation, like there's a lot of things that we need a lot of these traditional suppliers or traditional methodologies. But I really try to use those traditional methodologies as like a foundational approach, and then kind of take what I need from those into my DIY Agile testing, so then I can still learn with the approaches that we know have worked in the past.
Yeah, I love that. I almost think it's like kind of modularizing that bigger picture thinking. You still want to think about the bigger picture and how you're going to integrate all the pieces, but ultimately kind of having just those mods, available when you need them is key. I want to thank you both, Diego and Heather, and we'll have the lounge where we can continue our virtual question and answers if anyone can join us there. Huge thanks are coming in on the chat. So thanks to you both. Really, it was so great to be able to connect in this way.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.